The first thing Emperor Kaeldar noticed wasn't the human's face. It wasn't the military uniform. It wasn't even the medals pinned neatly across the chest. It was the scar. A pale line stretched from the human's right temple down across his neck before disappearing beneath the collar of his dark gray dress uniform. It wasn't clean. It wasn't elegant. It looked like something that should have killed him. The emperor stopped walking. For a heartbeat, the Hall of Sovereigns became completely silent. Thousands of alien nobles, generals, scientists, and diplomats watched as the ruler of the most powerful empire in known space froze in front of a single human. No one remembered the last time that had happened. The Avaron Empire had ruled the galaxy for more than 5,000 years. Their banners flew above over 600 inhabited star systems. 43 civilizations had either surrendered peacefully or been conquered by overwhelming force. Every military academy in the galaxy taught the same lesson. Resistance against Avaron was mathematically impossible. Yet humanity had refused. Not for weeks, not for months, for 4 years. For brutal years that had drained fleets, exhausted supply lines, and rewritten military theories that had remained unchanged for centuries. The war wasn't over because humanity had won. It was over because neither side could find a future where the fighting actually ended. That uncertainty frightened the Empire more than defeat ever could. Which was why a single human had been invited to the Imperial Palace. Not a famous admiral. Not Earth's president. Not even the commander of the Human Defense Fleet. Instead, a combat engineer, Master Sergeant Ethan Cross. Age 28. Occupation: repairing things that explosions tried to destroy. His military record contained no legendary victories. No impossible speeches. No political influence. Only a list of accidents that somehow failed to kill him. When Ethan stepped through the enormous silver doors of the Imperial Hall, he had expected hostility. Instead, he found curiosity. The chamber itself was larger than many cities on Earth. Transparent walls revealed the endless stars beyond, making it feel as though the entire meeting floated in space itself. Columns of living crystal rose hundreds of meters into the darkness above. Every step echoed softly across the polished black floor. At its center stood the Imperial throne, carved from the fossilized core of an extinct world. Waiting upon it sat Emperor Kaeldar. Even seated, he towered over everyone else. Nearly 9 feet tall, for powerful arms rested calmly upon the throne. His silver-black armor reflected the stars around him like liquid metal. 6 golden eyes studied Ethan without blinking. Around the throne stood 12 Imperial Guardians. None had ever been defeated. Not once. One of them leaned slightly toward Ethan as he approached. "You should kneel." His translator converted the alien language into perfect English. Ethan looked around. "No one told me that." The Guardian narrowed his eyes. "It is expected." Ethan scratched the back of his neck. "I'm terrible with expectations." Several alien advisors exchanged shocked looks. Was the human making a joke? The Guardian took one threatening step forward. Before anyone could react, the Emperor quietly raised one hand. The Guardian immediately stopped. Silence returned. Kaeldar slowly descended from the throne. Each heavy step echoed through the hall. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The Emperor stopped barely 2 meters from Ethan. For several seconds, he simply stared. Not at Ethan's face. Not at his medals. The scar. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "How did you receive that wound?" Ethan instinctively touched the faded mark along his neck. "This one." "Yes." "Oh." He smiled awkwardly. "Falling elevator." Every advisor frowned. The translator confirmed the answer. The Emperor blinked once. "Clarify. Our orbital station got hit during an attack. The emergency lift cable snapped. I fell 17 floors. Silence. I woke up 3 weeks later. One advisor immediately activated a medical scanner. Another opened Ethan's military records. A third whispered something rapidly in the Imperial language. The Emperor never looked away. "You survived a fall of over 100 meters. I got lucky." The scanner chimed. The advisor's expression changed. Your Majesty. He hesitated. The records indicate this is not an isolated incident. The Emperor extended one hand. The floating display drifted toward him. He began reading. His voice remained calm. Collapsed tunnel. Returned to active duty. Third-degree plasma burns. Returned to active duty. Decompression exposure. Returned to active duty. Multiple spinal fractures. Returned to active duty. Every sentence made the room quieter. By the 5th report, no one whispered anymore. By the 10th, even the Guardians had stopped pretending to be emotionless. The Emperor finally looked back at Ethan. These reports, they are accurate? Ethan shrugged. As far as I know. You continued serving after every injury. Somebody had to fix the ships. One advisor interrupted. Master Sergeant, were you ordered to return? Ethan looked confused. No. Then. Why? Ethan answered so casually that several translators checked themselves for errors. Because my team was still out there. The sentence echoed through the chamber. No dramatic speech. No patriotic slogan. Just, my team was still out there. The Emperor stared for a long moment. Then his eyes drifted once more toward the scar across Ethan's neck. Something changed behind those golden eyes. Not fear. Not admiration. Recognition. As though he had finally discovered the answer to a question that had haunted the Empire since the war began. Slowly, very slowly, the Emperor whispered words that none of his advisors had ever expected to hear. I believe we have misunderstood humanity. The Emperor did not return to his throne. Instead, he stood silently before Ethan Cross, studying him as if the human engineer had become more important than every admiral and politician gathered inside the Imperial Hall. The room remained perfectly still. No one dared interrupt. Finally, Kaeldar spoke. Bring the archive. The command echoed through the chamber. Within seconds, the polished floor split apart with mechanical precision. From beneath the throne room, a circular platform slowly rose upward. Resting upon it was a crystal sphere nearly 3 meters tall. It glowed softly from within, countless streams of light flowing through it like rivers. Ethan frowned. What is that? One Imperial advisor answered before the Emperor could. The Living Archive. It contains 5,000 years of every military campaign fought by the Avaron Empire. Ethan whistled quietly. That's a lot of paperwork. A few younger alien attendants exchanged confused looks. Was the human attempting humor? The Emperor ignored the comment. He placed one hand upon the glowing sphere. Immediately, thousands of holograms burst into existence above the hall. Stars, battlefields, entire civilizations. The history of the galaxy unfolded in silent light. One by one, conquered empires appeared. The first civilization had resisted for 11 days. The second survived 4 months. Another endured nearly a year before surrendering. Several possessed weapons far more advanced than anything humanity had built. Others outnumbered the Avarons 5-1. None lasted. Each eventually reached the same point. Their governments collapsed. Their soldiers refused new deployments. Their civilians demanded surrender. Their leaders accepted defeat. The archive labeled every campaign with a single conclusion. Conflict terminated. Then the final entry appeared. Species 44. Humanity. Instead of ending, the timeline simply continued. Year 1. Year 2. Year 3. Year 4. No surrender. No collapse. No termination. Only thousands upon thousands of engagements stretching endlessly across the stars. One advisor cleared his throat. Your Majesty. The projections still cannot calculate a definitive conclusion. Another stepped forward. Our strategic simulations have now exceeded 200 billion possible outcomes. And, the advisor hesitated. They all fail. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Even Ethan could hear it. The Emperor turned. Explain. The chief strategist swallowed carefully. Our models assume every known intelligent species eventually reaches systemic exhaustion. Civilian morale decreases. Industrial production declines. Military cohesion fractures. Political leadership accepts negotiated surrender. He paused. Humanity does not. The hologram shifted again. Graphs appeared. Supply lines. Ship production. Population losses. Psychological projections. Every graph eventually reached a point where Avaron mathematics expected humanity to break. Instead, the human line bent, recovered, then continued climbing. Again, and again, and again. Ethan folded his arms. I guess we're stubborn. The strategist looked directly at him. No, our translators do not possess an adequate word. He enlarged another chart. This is your industrial output. We destroyed 28% of your orbital shipyards. You replaced them. We destroyed your replacements. You built smaller factories. We targeted those. You moved production underground. We adapted. So did you. Every attempt to force humanity into predictable behavior had produced an unpredictable response. Another advisor activated a medical file. Perhaps biology explains the difference. Images appeared. Human anatomy rotated slowly beside an Avaron body. The comparison was startling. The chief xenobiologist addressed the room. Our species possesses an involuntary neurological safeguard. When physical trauma exceeds acceptable limits, the brain shuts itself down. It prevents permanent psychological damage. She shifted to another diagram. Every major civilization we've studied possesses a similar mechanism. Different alien nervous systems appeared. Different shapes. Different organs. The same biological response. Extreme trauma. Protective shutdown. Recovery. Return. The xenobiologist looked toward Ethan. Humans appear to possess no equivalent response. Ethan shrugged. I don't know. We just keep going. She shook her head. No. You continue despite pain that should render higher reasoning impossible. Another image appeared. A combat recording from the war. An explosion tore through a damaged human cruiser. Fire consumed an engineering compartment. The recording zoomed in. One figure continued crawling through smoke, dragging damaged power conduits behind him. The timestamp identified him immediately. Master Sergeant Ethan Cross. Ethan winced. Oh, I remember this one. The room watched silently. His left arm was visibly burned. Blood ran freely from his shoulder. Half the corridor had already lost atmosphere. Yet he continued pulling heavy equipment toward the reactor. One advisor whispered. He should already be unconscious. The recording continued. Ethan sealed the breach. Restarted emergency power. Collapsed. The reactor stabilized. The ship survived. 23,000 personnel lived. The video ended. Silence. The Emperor spoke quietly. You saved the vessel. Ethan nodded. My crew was still aboard. You nearly died. I know. You continued anyway. There wasn't anyone else close enough. The answer sounded almost disappointingly ordinary. No heroics. No speeches. Just simple logic. Someone had needed to do the job. So he had done it. The xenobiologist stared at him. Do humans receive specialized neurological conditioning? No. Chemical enhancement? No. Genetic modification? No. Then why? Ethan thought for several seconds. Finally, he smiled. My father used to tell me something. The room waited. When something breaks, you fix it. If people are depending on you, you don't leave. He scratched the back of his neck. I guess most of us grow up hearing things like that. The translators repeated the sentence throughout the hall. Several advisors looked genuinely unsettled. Not because the words were extraordinary. Because they weren't. The Emperor slowly turned toward the living archive once more. 5,000 years. 43 conquered civilizations. Millions of battles. Every military doctrine. Every strategic assumption. All built upon one universal belief. Every species eventually stops. Perhaps humanity never had. Kaeldar looked back at Ethan. For the first time in centuries, the Emperor realized he wasn't studying an enemy. He was studying an exception. And exceptions changed history. The Emperor dismissed the court with a single motion of his upper hand. No arguments. No questions. Within moments, the vast imperial hall emptied. Generals bowed and departed. Scientists gathered their data pads in uneasy silence. Even the 12 imperial guardians withdrew without a word. Only 3 figures remained: Emperor Kaeldar, Master Sergeant Ethan Cross, and the Emperor's oldest advisor, Chancellor Sereth. The enormous doors sealed shut behind them. A deep mechanical rumble echoed through the chamber. Ethan looked around. Either I'm about to receive a medal, or this is where you execute people. For the first time since the meeting began, the corner of the Emperor's mouth moved slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. It is neither. He turned toward the throne. The ancient seat slowly rotated, revealing a hidden passage descending into darkness. I wish to show you something that no foreign representative has ever seen. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds classified. It is. So, why me? The Emperor answered without looking back. Because you are the reason I questioned 5,000 years of certainty. The passage stretched deep beneath the palace. The walls were carved from black stone veined with glowing silver minerals. Unlike the grandeur above, this place was quiet and functional. No statues, no banners, no symbols of conquest, only history. Every few meters, sealed vault doors lined the corridor. Each bore a date. Some were thousands of years old. Others looked almost new. Ethan noticed one marked, Campaign 17 sealed. Another, Campaign 29 restricted. Then one unlike all the others. Its inscription simply read, Humanity. He stopped walking. We already have a vault? Chancellor Sereth answered. It was created 6 weeks after your species entered the war. Ethan frowned. 6 weeks. You'd barely learned our language by then. The Chancellor nodded. Exactly. The massive vault door slid open. Cold air drifted out. Lights awakened one by one. The room beyond looked less like a museum and more like a command center frozen in time. Holographic battle maps floated above long tables. Destroyed Avaron warships rotated slowly in projection. Fragments of damaged armor rested behind transparent cases. Entire walls were covered with tactical reports. Every document carried the same red imperial seal. High priority. At the center of the room stood a circular table. Across its surface floated hundreds of tiny stars. Each represented a battle. Red lights marked Avaron victories. Blue lights marked human resistance. There were far more red lights. Yet something caught Ethan's attention. Almost every blue light appeared in impossible places. Cut off. Surrounded. Outnumbered. He pointed toward one. I remember that system. The Emperor glanced at the display. Station Helios. Ethan nodded. We lost. The Emperor looked directly at him. No. You delayed our advance for 39 days. You repaired orbital defenses while under continuous bombardment. Our fleet expected resistance for 3 hours. He enlarged the battle. Our invasion schedule across 12 neighboring sectors collapsed. Ethan blinked. I was replacing coolant pipes. So our reports indicate. Another projection appeared. A frozen transport convoy. Cargo containers. Repair drones. Construction equipment. No weapons. No military escort? Ethan asked. No. You attacked it anyway? The Chancellor shook his head. We believed it to be an ammunition convoy. What was it actually? The Emperor expanded the manifest. Replacement reactor parts. Medical equipment. Water purification systems. Emergency shelter fabricators. Ethan sighed. Yeah. That sounds about right. The Emperor continued. Within 72 hours, human civilians rebuilt 3 destroyed colonies. Our intelligence predicted recovery would require 8 months. It required 6 days. The holograms shifted again. Now the room displayed thousands of intercepted human communications. None appeared extraordinary. a mechanic requesting spare bolts, a medic asking for blood supplies, parents sending recorded messages to children, workers organizing evacuation routes, engineers discussing power grids. Ethan looked confused. Why are these classified? The Chancellor answered softly, because we could not understand them. He activated another recording. A tired human technician appeared on screen. His face was blackened with soot. Behind him, sparks rained from damaged machinery. He smiled at the camera. We're holding. Another clip. A nurse. Exhausted. Barely able to stand. We're holding. Another. A firefighter. Missing an arm. Still smiling. We're holding. Again. 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 Different worlds. Different battles. Different people. The same words. We're holding. Ethan smiled quietly. Sounds like us. The Emperor looked at him. No. It terrifies us. He touched another control. A strategic report filled the room. Psychological assessment, humans. Expected morale collapse, month 9. Observed result. Increased recruitment. Another report. Industrial failure probability, 82%. Observed result. Civilian production increased 31%. Another. Population fatigue index. Expected surrender probability, 94%. Observed result. Refusal. Every prediction ended the same way. Incorrect. 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 The Emperor's voice grew quieter. For 5,000 years, our empire believed every civilization could be understood, measured, predicted, controlled. He looked toward Ethan. Your species refused every prediction. Ethan studied one final display. It showed a simple line graph. Nothing more. One line represented Avaron confidence. The other represented uncertainty. During the first months of the war, confidence remained almost absolute. Then, slowly, it began falling. Month after month. Year after year. By the 4th year, the uncertainty line stood above everything else. At the bottom of the graph appeared a single recommendation from the Imperial Strategic Council. Continued conflict no longer possesses a calculable conclusion. Ethan let out a slow breath. So, you didn't stop because you were losing. No, you stopped because you couldn't prove you'd ever win. The Emperor met his eyes. Correct. Silence settled over the ancient vault. Finally, Kaeldar spoke the words no Avaron ruler had ever admitted aloud. The greatest military empire in galactic history became afraid of uncertainty. Ethan looked around the vault one last time. Thousands of reports. Millions of calculations. 5,000 years of unmatched victories. All defeated, not by a superweapon, not by impossible technology, but by one question the Empire could never answer. How do you defeat someone who never decides to quit? For the first time since arriving on the Imperial world, Ethan understood why Earth had sent an engineer instead of a general. Sometimes, the person who fixes broken things understands endurance better than anyone else. The war vault remained silent. Ethan stood before thousands of battle reports that had rewritten the history of the galaxy. Every projection, every simulation, every prediction reached the same conclusion. Humanity could not be modeled. The Emperor slowly deactivated the holograms. One by one, the glowing displays disappeared until only a single star map remained floating above the central table. It showed the border between the Avaron Empire and human space. For the first time in 5,000 years, that border was no longer moving. Kaeldar folded his 4 hands behind his back. There is something I have not told my advisors. Ethan looked up. What? The Emperor's expression grew unusually serious. The Empire did not request peace because of the casualties. It did not request peace because of the cost. It requested peace because of a discovery. Ethan frowned. What discovery? Without answering, Kaeldar touched the table. A recording appeared. This footage is classified at the highest level. It has never been shown outside the Imperial Council. The recording began. The battle had taken place nearly 8 months earlier. The system designation flashed across the screen. Orion's Gate. Ethan immediately recognized it. That was one of the worst battles of the war. It was, the Emperor replied. The footage showed hundreds of Avaron warships advancing toward a damaged human defensive line. The outcome seemed inevitable. Human ships were burning. Stations were collapsing. Entire fleets had already withdrawn. The Imperial narrator accompanying the recording spoke calmly. Enemy resistance expected to end within 14 minutes. The fleet advanced. Then something happened. A human cruiser, already split nearly in half, turned back toward the battlefield. Ethan leaned closer. I know that ship. Its engines were failing. Its hull was torn open. Half its weapons were gone. According to every military doctrine in the galaxy, it should have retreated. Instead, it accelerated, straight toward the Imperial fleet. Another damaged ship followed. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of crippled human vessels reversed course. Not because they expected victory, because another evacuation convoy had not escaped yet. The Emperor paused the recording. Our tactical computers reported this maneuver as impossible. Ethan smiled faintly. They were buying time. They were dying. They knew that. So did we. The Emperor enlarged the sensor logs. Every human captain aboard those ships had received identical survival estimates. Chance of survival, less than 1%. Not one vessel turned away. The recording resumed. The crippled ships spread across the battlefield. Instead of attacking directly, they became shields. They intercepted incoming fire, blocked firing lanes, rammed disabled Imperial cruisers to delay pursuit. One vessel exploded after taking a direct plasma strike. Seconds later, another moved into its place. Then another. Then another. The evacuation convoy escaped. Nearly 2 million civilians survived. The last human warship disappeared from the display. Destroyed. The room fell quiet. The Emperor looked toward Ethan. Our commanders believed this must have been an error. They assumed the retreat order had failed to transmit. Ethan slowly shook his head. No. They got it. They ignored it. Why? Because civilians come first. The Emperor remained silent. After a moment, Ethan added quietly, they always come first. Kaeldar activated another document. This one wasn't a battle report. It was an interrogation transcript. An Imperial rescue vessel had recovered a surviving human officer from Orion's Gate. The officer had been critically wounded. The transcript displayed his first recorded answer. Question: why did your fleet return? Answer: because they weren't all out yet. Another question: did you believe you could win? Answer: no. Then why continue fighting? The final answer appeared. Winning wasn't the mission. Buying 5 more minutes was. The Emperor looked at Ethan. Our interrogators believed the prisoner misunderstood the question. They asked it 6 more times. The answer never changed. Ethan nodded. Sounds about right. The Emperor walked slowly toward one of the vault's observation windows. Beyond it stretched the lights of the Imperial capital. Thousands of ships crossed the sky. For centuries, every one of them had represented certainty. Now, they represented questions. When I was young, Kaeldar said quietly, my tutors taught me that true strength was measured by survival. He turned. Your species measures strength differently. Ethan crossed his arms. How do you mean? You believe survival has value only if someone else survives with you. The words lingered in the air. Ethan hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe the Emperor was right. He remembered engineers refusing evacuation until every reactor was stable. Medics staying behind with patients they couldn't move. Pilots covering civilian transports with damaged fighters that should never have stayed in combat. No one had called those actions heroic. They had simply called them their job. The Emperor stepped closer. There is another question. Ethan chuckled. You ask a lot of questions. I have ruled an empire for 3 centuries. I have recently realized how little I know. That answer surprised Ethan more than anything else he'd heard that day. Kaeldar looked directly into his eyes. Tell me honestly, If humanity knew it could never defeat US, would it still have fought? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he remembered Earth during the first year of the war. Cities building shelters, children helping pack medical supplies, factory workers sleeping beside assembly lines, families saying goodbye without knowing if they would meet again. He remembered the fear, the exhaustion, the funerals. Then he looked back at the Emperor. Yes. Kaeldar didn't blink. You are certain? Ethan nodded. We weren't fighting because victory was guaranteed. We were fighting because home was behind us. Silence filled the vault. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Then, for the first time in centuries, the Emperor bowed his head. Only slightly, but enough. Not to an enemy, not to a soldier, to an idea. An idea his empire had never understood until now. And deep within the imperial palace, the ruler of the greatest empire in galactic history made a decision that would change the future of every civilization among the stars. For 3 days, Ethan Cross was not allowed to leave the imperial palace. He wasn't a prisoner. No guards stood outside his quarters. No doors were locked. Yet every corridor he walked seemed to lead to another meeting, another interview, another scientist eager to ask impossible questions. One wanted to know how humans tolerated pain. Another asked why human soldiers continued fighting after losing close friends. A historian spent nearly 2 hours asking Ethan about childhood games on Earth. That question confused him more than the others. You crossed a river on floating logs. For fun? The historian asked. Sometimes, Ethan replied. And many children fell into the water willingly? Ethan laughed. Usually because someone pushed them. The historian stared at his tablet in silence before typing a single note. Risk assessment begins unusually. Early in human development, Ethan shook his head. You guys really overthink everything. On the morning of the 4th day, Chancellor Sereth arrived outside Ethan's room. The Emperor requests your presence. Ethan followed him through parts of the palace he hadn't seen before. Massive windows overlooked the imperial capital. Millions of lights stretched to the horizon. Air traffic flowed between elegant towers with perfect precision. Everything about Avaron civilization reflected order, control, predictability. It was beautiful. It was also strangely quiet. No street performers. No crowded markets. No children chasing one another through open plazas. Life here seemed efficient, almost too efficient, as if chaos itself had been engineered out of existence. Ethan suddenly understood why humans fascinated them. Humans were chaos, useful chaos. The doors ahead opened. Beyond them waited the Imperial Council chamber. Unlike the throne room, this chamber was circular. 300 seats rose in concentric rings around a central platform. Representatives from every major imperial world filled them. Fleet admirals, governors, scientists, industrial overseers, religious elders. Some looked curious. Others looked openly hostile. As Ethan entered, conversations stopped. The only human in the room suddenly felt very small. Emperor Kaeldar stood at the center. The council is assembled. His voice echoed across the chamber. We begin. An elderly admiral rose first. His armor carried more battle honors than Ethan could count. He spoke without hesitation. Your Majesty, the human coalition remains dangerous. Our analysts confirm they cannot currently threaten imperial territory. However, they will grow. They adapt too quickly. We should resume military operations before they recover. Several council members nodded. Another representative stood. Our industries suffered significant losses. A negotiated peace demonstrates weakness. A third added, 43 civilizations accepted imperial authority. Why should humanity be treated differently? Murmurs spread through the chamber. The mood was clear. Many wanted the war to continue. Marcus. He could repair life support systems with half the parts missing. Another. Leah. She once stayed awake for 51 hours rebuilding an orbital shield generator. Another. Tom. He lost his left leg during the second year of the war. He came back 6 months later because he hated paperwork more than physical therapy. A few council members blinked. Ethan smiled. He really did. Soft laughter spread unexpectedly through the chamber. Then Ethan's smile faded. 7 people in this picture didn't survive the war. Silence returned. They weren't heroes because they wanted to be. They just had jobs. And they refused to leave those jobs unfinished. He looked around the council. I'm not special. I'm just the one who happened to still be alive. Head of Imperial Expansion. His expression was hard. Emotion is clouding judgment. He pointed toward Ethan. This human is an exception. We cannot base imperial policy on one individual. Several representatives nodded. Varric continued. History has taught us that every civilization eventually conforms. They all become predictable. They all accept reality. He folded his hands. Humans will be no different. The chamber murmured again. It was a reasonable argument. If Ethan was unique, then perhaps everything the Emperor believed was built upon a single extraordinary soldier. Kaeldar turned toward Ethan. You said you were ordinary. I am. Varric laughed quietly. You survived injuries that should have killed you. You repaired reactors under bombardment. You volunteered for impossible assignments. That is not ordinary. Ethan sighed. I've been trying to explain this for 3 days. He reached into the pocket of his dress uniform. The nearby guardians tensed instinctively. Instead of a weapon, he removed a worn photograph. The edges were bent. The colors slightly faded. He placed it on the central table. The holographic system enlarged the image automatically. It showed 12 people standing inside an engineering bay. Grease covered nearly every uniform. Some smiled. Some looked exhausted. One woman held a coffee mug almost larger than her head. Another mechanic was pretending to sleep while leaning against a repair drone. Everyone looked ordinary. Ethan pointed to the picture. This was my maintenance team. He pointed at the first mechanic. Jenna, best reactor technician I've ever met. Another. They should have withdrawn. They did not. The display zoomed in. One damaged destroyer drifted through space. Engines dead. Weapons nearly destroyed. Yet instead of surrendering, it rotated its hull, using its own crippled frame as a shield for 3 evacuation transports escaping behind it. The destroyer was hit again, and again, and again. Still it did not move. Finally it exploded. The transports escaped. Razek looked around the chamber. Our tactical officers celebrated another victory. He paused. I did not. He enlarged the sensor logs. The captain of that destroyer transmitted one final message before his ship was destroyed. The recording played. Static filled the chamber. Then a calm human voice spoke. Convoy clear. Mission complete. Nothing else. No farewell. No dramatic last words. Only confirmation that the civilians had escaped. The words lingered. No one interrupted. Not even Minister Varric. The Emperor slowly walked to the photograph. He studied every face. Not decorated generals. Not legendary warriors. Mechanics. Electricians. Technicians. Ordinary people. Yet, according to every report in the Imperial Archive, millions of humans had behaved exactly like them. Kaeldar finally understood. It had never been about extraordinary individuals. It had been about an ordinary civilization making extraordinary choices every single day. He looked back at the council. You asked whether this human represents his species. He rested one hand beside the photograph. I now believe the opposite. He paused. I believe his species is represented by this photograph. No one argued, because for the first time, the Empire wasn't looking at a soldier. It was looking at humanity. The voting pillars around the chamber slowly began to glow. 300 representatives prepared to cast their decision. Outside the great windows, the lights of the imperial capital shimmered beneath the stars. Across countless worlds, billions waited for the result. The future of the galaxy now depended on a single vote. And Ethan realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the old nerve damage in his right arm. He quietly curled his fingers into a fist until the tremor settled. The Emperor noticed. He said nothing, but in that small, determined movement, he saw the same truth he had seen in every human report. They did not wait to become perfect. They simply kept going. The voting lights brightened. The decision was about to begin. The council chamber fell completely silent. 300 voting pillars glowed around the circular hall, each waiting for a single decision. Above them floated one sentence in brilliant silver letters. Proposal 7719A. Recognition of the human coalition as a sovereign galactic power. Ethan stared at the display. Still didn't feel real. For years earlier, humanity had been struggling simply to survive. Now the most powerful empire in the galaxy was preparing to decide whether Earth would become something no civilization had been in thousands of years. Across the chamber, Chancellor Sereth stepped forward. By imperial law, each representative will cast one vote. He paused. The result cannot be altered once recorded. One by one, the pillars began to change color. Blue, gold, blue, gold. The chamber remained perfectly silent as the count continued. Ethan couldn't tell which color meant what. Neither could anyone watching from Earth. Several minutes passed. Finally, the last pillar lit. The chamber darkened. The central display began calculating. Numbers rolled across the enormous hologram. Every representative watched without speaking. At last, the result appeared. For recognition, 247. Against 53. The proposal had passed. Not narrowly, decisively. For a moment, no one moved. Even the representatives who had opposed the proposal simply stared at the result. 5,000 years of imperial history had just changed. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of celebrating, the Emperor remained seated. His expression was thoughtful, almost solemn. He slowly stood. The vote is accepted. His voice echoed across the chamber. But there remains one final matter. A ripple of confusion spread through the council. Chancellor Sereth looked surprised. Your Majesty? The Emperor nodded. There exists an older law. The Chancellor's expression changed immediately. No! Several elderly council members exchanged uneasy glances. One religious elder quietly whispered, I thought it had been forgotten. Ethan frowned. What law? The Emperor looked directly at him. It predates the Empire itself. He touched the central platform. A new document appeared. Unlike the others, it was ancient. The script looked almost hand-carved. Time itself seemed preserved within it. This law, Kaeldar explained, was written before our people became conquerors. It belonged to an age when our civilization still believed allies were more valuable than subjects. The room remained silent. We have invoked it only once. Ethan read the translated title, The Covenant of Equal Stars. What does it mean? He asked. The Emperor answered slowly. It means the Empire may choose partnership instead of dominion. Not conquest. Not submission. Partnership. The word echoed through the chamber. For many representatives, it sounded almost foreign. Minister Varric stood abruptly. This is unacceptable. The covenant has not been used in over 4 millennia. It weakens imperial authority. It grants equal standing to outsiders. The Emperor met his gaze calmly. It grants equal standing only to civilizations that earn it. Varric pointed toward Ethan. They are newcomers. They possess primitive technology. They control fewer than 100 systems. The Emperor nodded. All true. Then he asked one question. And yet, which civilization forced this empire to reconsider 5,000 years of certainty? Varric had no answer. Kaeldar turned toward Ethan. When our historians write of this war, they will not write that humanity defeated us. They will write something more important. They will write that humanity changed us. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. We didn't come here to change anyone. I know. You came to survive. The Emperor smiled faintly. And sometimes, survival teaches lessons victory never could. The massive doors at the far end of the chamber slowly opened. A ceremonial platform floated into the room. Upon it rested two identical crystal emblems. One bore the symbol of the Avaron Empire. The other was blank. Chancellor Sereth looked toward Ethan. Under the covenant of equal stars, the human coalition may choose its own symbol. It will stand beside ours. Forever. Ethan looked at the empty emblem. He had expected to sign a treaty. He had expected perhaps a few speeches. He had never imagined that humanity would be invited to define its place among the stars. He smiled quietly. I think Earth should decide that. The Emperor inclined his head. A wise answer. At that exact moment, a communications officer rushed into the chamber. He stopped just inside the doorway, breathing heavily. Your Majesty! The interruption shocked everyone. Council sessions were never disturbed. What is it? The Emperor asked. The officer activated a holographic transmission. A star map appeared. One of the outer imperial colonies flashed urgently. Then another. Then another. Red warning symbols spread across the frontier. The chamber immediately became tense. Report. The officer swallowed. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet entering known space. Every representative froze. The officer continued. They are not human. They are not imperial. We cannot identify their technology. The room became deathly quiet. The Emperor slowly looked toward Ethan. Only moments ago, the Empire and humanity had ended one war. Now, a new threat had appeared beyond the edge of explored space. And for the first time in history, the galaxy would not face it divided. It would face it together. No one spoke. The red warning markers spread across the holographic star map like drops of blood. One colony after another vanished behind blinking signals. The communications officer steadied his breathing. Our frontier observatories transmitted only one confirmed image before contact was lost. The hologram changed. A fleet appeared. At first glance, the ships looked wrong. They had no visible engines, no obvious weapons, no smooth lines or elegant architecture like imperial vessels. They looked ancient, angular, and scarred, as if they had crossed the darkness between galaxies without ever stopping for repairs. Each ship carried countless layers of armor welded together over centuries. The Imperial Council stared in silence. Chancellor Sereth whispered, I have never seen a design like this. The Emperor folded his hands behind his back. Can they communicate? We've transmitted on every known frequency. No response. Can we estimate their numbers? The officer hesitated. Our sensors stopped counting after 12,000 vessels. The chamber became deathly quiet. Even the largest Avaron invasion fleets had never reached that size. Ethan looked at the display. The fleet wasn't moving toward Earth. It wasn't moving toward the imperial capital either. It was heading for the border between them, almost as if it expected two enemies to still be fighting. Instead, it would find something very different. The Emperor turned toward Ethan. It appears history has given us little time to celebrate. Ethan smiled faintly. Story of our lives. A few council members actually laughed. It was brief, but genuine. The first shared laughter between former enemies. Within hours, the palace transformed into a joint command center. Human officers arrived through emergency jump corridors. Imperial admirals spread tactical projections across the same tables where they had once planned humanity's defeat. For a moment, everyone hesitated. Years of war were not forgotten overnight. Then a young human communications lieutenant quietly slid a chair toward an imperial strategist who had nowhere to sit. The strategist paused, then accepted it. No speeches, no ceremony, just a chair. Ethan noticed. He smiled. That was how humans usually became friends. One small action at a time. The combined fleet launched 48 hours later. For the first time in recorded galactic history, human warships flew beside imperial battlecruisers. Different designs, different technology, One purpose. The stars outside the command deck stretched into brilliant lines as thousands of vessels entered faster than light travel together. On the flagship bridge, Ethan stood beside Emperor Kaeldar. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, the Emperor broke the silence. When we first met, I believed your scar represented unusual resilience. He glanced toward Ethan. I now understand it represents something much larger. Ethan looked down at the pale mark crossing his neck. It just reminds me to be careful around elevators. The Emperor blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not loudly, not for long, but enough that everyone on the bridge turned in surprise. No one could remember the last time the Emperor had laughed. The fleet arrived at the frontier. What they found waiting beyond the final star system chilled everyone. The unknown armada stretched farther than sensors could measure. Ancient, silent, patient. Then, one vessel detached itself from the formation. It moved slowly toward the Allied fleet. No weapons powered up. No attack formations. Only a single transmission. Every translator in both fleets struggled to interpret it. Finally, one sentence appeared across every screen. Which civilization refused extinction? The bridge fell silent. The Emperor slowly looked toward Ethan. They're asking for humanity. Ethan frowned. Why? No one knew. Another message followed. Older, harder to translate. Fragments slowly assembled into readable language. We observed your war. The Empire endured. Humanity endured. Only one chose to protect the other after peace became possible. The command bridge remained perfectly still. The final line appeared. Such civilizations are rare. The unknown fleet began powering down its weapons. One by one, 12,000 ships. Then came the message no one expected. You are ready. Before anyone could respond, the entire armada turned. Without firing a single shot, without crossing the border, they departed into intergalactic darkness. Within minutes, they were gone. Silence lingered across every bridge. No alarms, no battle, only questions. The Emperor looked out at the empty stars. For centuries, we believed strength meant conquest. He turned toward Ethan. They judged us by something else. Ethan folded his arms. Looks that way. The Emperor nodded slowly. They judged whether we could choose cooperation over domination. Weeks later, representatives from every known civilization gathered above Earth. Not above the imperial capital. Above Earth. The covenant of equal stars was signed before the eyes of the entire galaxy. Two crystal emblems stood side by side. The imperial crest, and humanity's newly chosen symbol. Not a weapon, not a warship, not even the planet Earth. Instead, a simple open hand reaching toward a field of stars. Promise. Not of surrender, not of conquest, but of partnership. When it came time to sign, Emperor Kaeldar stepped aside. You first, he said. Ethan looked around in surprise. I'm still just an engineer. The Emperor smiled. And that is exactly why. Ethan accepted the stylus. His fingers trembled slightly, the same old nerve damage that had never completely healed. He took a slow breath, steadied his hand, and signed. Not because he was the greatest soldier humanity had ever produced. Not because he had won the war alone. But because somewhere, years earlier, in a burning engineering compartment, he had decided to keep moving one more step. Then another, and another. That simple decision had carried him across battlefields, across peace negotiations, and finally, to a moment that changed the future of the galaxy. As the ceremony ended, a young Imperial cadet approached him. Master Sergeant, I wish to ask one question. Ethan smiled. Shoot. The cadet hesitated. What is the greatest strength of humanity? Ethan looked through the observation window toward the blue and white world below. He thought of mechanics repairing impossible damage, doctors refusing to abandon patients, parents protecting children, firefighters running toward danger, friends carrying one another home. He smiled. We're not the strongest. We're not the smartest. We're not the oldest. He paused. But when someone needs us, we show up. The cadet bowed quietly. Beyond the station's windows, human and imperial ships crossed the sky together, no longer as enemies, but as allies. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, an ancient civilization carried with it a new story to tell, not of the empire that conquered the stars, but of the species that taught an empire why some things were worth protecting together. The end.